finesse and for their manners in public. They were actually a pretty rough bunch, pretty rough crowd. And then you had somebody who was a tax collector, chosen to be a disciple, a person hated by the Jewish people that Jesus chose. Then you have a traitor, a thief. Now, in some of the Gospels, we don't learn that Judas is actually a thief, but in the book of John, John tells us that Judas used to kind of help himself to the money bag whenever he wanted. But yet Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him. He prophesied it to his disciples. But then one of the people that stand out in my mind the most for disciples is kind of an obscure figure. We don't hear a lot about him because there's not a lot about written of him in the Scriptures. And his name in Scriptures, he's called Simon the Zealot. Now, a zealot during the times of Jesus were actually a political group. They were a group that feared and hated the Roman authority. And the zealots would often plan and carry out assassinations of Roman authorities and those Jewish leaders that were in cohorts with the Roman authorities. So you look at this guy here, Simon the Zealot, and again, there's not much written about him, but a guy who was a possible murderer. Jesus calls to be his disciples. And though all this sounds like a cliche, you can't help but look at this passage of Jephthah and see all of the great faults that Jephthah had. And then how God used him to deliver the Ammonites. Now, I'm not certainly pointing to Jephthah as a godly example. I'm not saying, hey, let's follow Jephthah's example in the spiritual aspect, because no, you can't. Jephthah was very crude and, just that kind of a guy. And I certainly don't point or esteem him as a spiritual leader. What I see is a guy that's crude, that's selfish to a point, and he's very insecure about his future. He's so insecure that his brothers won't keep his promise that he has to gather the people around him and make them take a vow so that the vow will be kept. But yet when you turn to the book of Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews was inspired to include his name in the Hebrews Hall of Faith. He just brushes over him and mentions him by name as a way of Samson, just like he does Samson and a couple of the others. He doesn't point out Jephthah for his great faith in God. He simply points out Jephthah being the person that God used with a little bit of faith that he might have had. What I want us to learn here from Jephthah is that it doesn't matter how marred a person's past is. It doesn't matter how blackened they think they are. A person, when they come and are regenerated and born again of Christ, they are made something different. Their sin and what they have done in the past has been left at the foot of the cross. And they're forever from that time on in God's service. It can be an encouragement for us because we don't have to be and have it all together for God to use us. I mean, we can look at men all throughout the history of the church and see how God used sinful, plain, wicked men in order to advance his kingdom. God used Jephthah. God used Ehud. God used the disciples. We somehow look at these men and think that they were somehow more special or more spiritual or on a higher spiritual plane than we are. Yet, Hebrews again tells us that Elijah was a man just like we are. But yet when he prayed, God heard him. God answered him. So let's take encouragement this morning from the negative characteristics of Jephthah, and apply them to the fact that no matter what sin has marked our past, that it's something that can be redeemed and used for the glory of God. Let's pray.